Welcome to today's CIO Watercooler TV. My name is David Savage, I'm your host for today, and I'm joined by Diarmaid, who is the Chief Technology and Digital Officer for the Sussex Community Trust within the NHS. How are you this morning?
I'm very well, thank you.
I quite like that the preparation for this conversation, by the way, was David Savage to pose questions on transforming the NHS.
Yep.
Small topic.
No doubt.
Look, we caught up earlier in the year, and I think you were reasonably new to your post at that point. Yes. How's the last 6 months in post been for you?
A bit of a baptism of fire.
Yep.
In terms of discovering what the reality is. That journey from being at the centre, working at Public Health England and involved in NHS England quite a bit, to now being on the front line in a kind of in a trust that's delivering services to patients has been quite a significant eye-opener for me. Going in and discovering that the systems that they're reliant on don't have any resilience, and they go pop on your third week or fourth week in, and discovering that patients aren't getting the treatment they need today, right now, and also kind of all those kind of nightmares almost as you walk in the door is a kind of a salient lesson in the underinvestment in the technology and also the reliance on it. It's kind of an interesting dichotomy. That's been bit of the experience, which has been chastening and slightly alarming, but we're getting ourselves in a better shape. But at the same time, having spent it's been an amazing experience. I'm really fortunate that in my role I've been given the opportunity to go out with frontline staff and visit and watch them do their jobs, and I've never really worked in that kind of experience before. So going out with community nurses or being in children development centres or whatever the various services are, and actually just being kind of blown away by the whole job of caring for people and what's that really like and how amazing it is, and then being inspired by that to try to figure out how you can use the technology to help them do their job. I think that's been my journey. There's another level to that question, which is the chaos of the NHS, which is now I'm kind of moving into to try to do my job better. But that's a kind of a growing area.
I suppose I'd be really interested to find out from you, very candidly, how you see your role fitting into that idea. Because fundamentally, let's face it, it's about delivering a good service to patients on the front line. There are increasingly a number of health tech startups and scale-ups who are trying to fix singular issues across the industry, and they're doing that very well. Do you think it's your job to go in and try and enable the technology to deliver a service to patients, or do you think it's actually about creating a platform for some of these innovators to come in and provide expertise where they can?
I would say it's a kind of a bit of both. But to go to the second half of what you've asked, which is the idea of a platform, some of that's actually a cultural platform. So when I turned up, I realised that there was loads of innovations that small little pockets of the organisation, one or two people in a service doing musculoskeletal care or maybe helping children with autism, they're trying apps, they're trying websites, the little ideas that they've either self-developed or they've got a relationship with somebody and they're working in a kind of almost a pro bono fashion to just see if it might work. And when you speak to them, you realise that they've got something that potentially is really, really beneficial to the organisation, but they, as people trying to use innovations, had no one to talk to. No one to talk to at all. There was no formal place where they could say, we need support, we need permission, we need funding, whatever it is. So we immediately set up a digital innovation support group as such, and gave them a place to come to, populated it with people from inside our organisation, but also important organisations that are part of the health system around us, and said, come and talk to us, and then we will work together with you to try and figure out how we can use your innovations. Or if it's a bad idea, kill it quickly, because then no one should waste any more money on it. So that's a part of it. But also, the first half of your question was about internally, I suppose. It's also trying to be innovative with your own platforms, your own systems, and so it's not just one or the other. You've got to work with what you've got and do that innovative stuff, but you've got to make yourself open to the outside world as well. And I think that's a bit of a cultural thing that I'm trying to drive in my role in that respect.
Have you tried to establish relationships with other trusts? I mean, you mentioned there that you are Sussex Community Trust, but are you working with trusts in London, across the South East, across England, to try and find best practice? Because each trust is so different within the NHS.
So absolutely, I think it's a fundamental responsibility of this role to develop relationships with individuals who are your peers across the network and others that they may be working around. So I try to get out to visit as many other trusts to understand what they're doing, where they are in their decision making. You know, so I was in South London and Worsley recently. I have my equivalent. So where we are as a community trust, which is kind of stretched across the whole of Sussex, there's a mental health trust, which is stretched across the whole of Sussex. Then you've got a couple of acute trusts. So you need to have really good working relationships with those individuals. You know, conundrums such as, you know, their staff need to access our systems to do their jobs better. Our staff need to access their systems. We need to share data. And unless you start to make a good working relationship, those things are going to be problematic and you have nowhere to escalate to solve those problems. So that's a big part of it. And, you know, none of the decisions that you're making, somebody else hasn't in some way encountered. So there's a lot to learn from what other people have done, and you can bring that intelligent information back. And also, the way that the health system is kind of changing, it's basically saying it was, you know, the legislation of 2012, the Lansley reforms kind of made the kind of internal market stuff kind of quite powerful, and it meant that parts of the system were always competing against each other to win commissions, to own services, that kind of stuff. But now it's moving up towards saying the real solution for the health system is to integrate shared data so that your patient experience feels joined up. So my GP knows the thing is same as my physio, same as the consultant I might go and see in a hospital. They all need to have all the same data to know who you are, and that is forcing a collaboration. So you do have a dichotomy that you as senior leaders in these systems need to try to bridge, which is you're working in a competitive space, but you need to kind of have some cognitive dissonance and say, but I'm going to work really carefully to make sure that we can collaborate and make these services better as well. So that's the kind of conundrum of it.
Look, obviously we've got an election coming up in a few weeks. I'm not going to get into party politics, but when we talk about the NHS, I suppose at a national level, we tend to talk about money going into the NHS. There's a huge amount of money that does go into the NHS already, and I sometimes think, well, isn't it just down to efficiency and organisation and management? And, you know, the organisation that you're describing there is disparate. There's many different levels and players. You came from NHS England. If you were to talk very honestly again, I mean, is it really a case of more money needed, or can technology play a truly transformative role in terms of enabling better management and better flow of resources through the organisation to help deliver services?
Yeah, I think my experience has been that there seems to be significant amount of money floating around at the centre, looking to try to find a way to the kind of the front line. Yeah. And it's getting out there in certain cases. The experience that I've learned about how that's been happening over the last few years has been that it has been, some people believe, wrongly kind of set up. So is it investing in areas to make parts of the organisation kind of be kind of jealous of each other almost, and be a bit overly competitive rather than collaborative? So there's, you know, you can spend the money in the wrong way that kind of causes a problem. I think when I went to my role 6 months or so ago, and you discover that even though there's all this money floating around, the trust that I've came in hasn't got the money it needs to invest in the kit, and hasn't had it for some period of time. So, you know, I found computers that are 15 years old running clinical services. So that's illustrative of me of a complete lack of funding in the right place. I remember Matthew Gould, when he took over in NHSX, he did a good amount of time running around the health system visiting, and one of his early quotes is, "We need to fix the basics." Yep. And so even though there's all this money and it feels like we could solve every problem with it, the reality is on the front line, people have got laptops that are still running Windows 7 or whatever, and the world's moved on, and they're still stuck there, and that's really inhibiting their ability to use their technology. So I think great that there's money there, and it's brilliant if more of it could make its way to the front line, but it's not working enough in my view, and then the need is massive and it's still not being met.
Last point to finish on. Obviously you've been there for a few months now. Positive note to finish on. What's the most kind of uplifting thing that you've seen coming out of the work that you're doing that makes you go, yeah, this role is a great place to be. The NHS is a fantastic organisation to work in? I
think the experience that I've had going into the role that I think gives me my optimism from what I'm doing is going out on the road with community nurses. And I've had the opportunity to go out with a lot of different types of services. When I went out with one particular community nurse, we were visiting people. You go house to house and you go in and help them with various different types of situations. One instance, we'd go into an old lady's house who'd had a hip operation recently. She was in distress. Her daughter was down. There was sons on the phones in the middle of the room. Everyone in a bit of a panic because she couldn't cook for herself. She couldn't stand up properly. She was difficult to get into bed. All those kind of situations. And the new nurse I went in there with had no real anticipation of what she was going to walk into. She was able to calmly sit there, take her laptop out, have a conversation with everybody by writing a few notes and sending a few referrals using the systems that we've put in place. And she was online with her laptop. She was instantaneously able to get the support in that she could bring so that people came visit that day, helped put steps to the bed, got meals delivered. All of a sudden, the children of this old lady relax and are calm and feel like their worries have been reduced. They'd been taking days off work. You can imagine the whole kind of spiral effect. And I spoke to the community nurse who I was visiting with, and I asked her, how would that have been like in the past? And she said, every single one of those referrals to other services would have taken days, paperwork being shunted around, and so it was instantaneous support. So when you see that, you get a sense of what the power of technology could be, and that's what you understand your job to be about.
Look, Diarmaid, thank you very much for spending some time chatting to us today. If you've enjoyed today's episode of CIO Water Cooler TV, please do check the links below for more content.